Okay, so welcome to Baking History. I'm Dara, and this is Olivia, and I'm getting us started again because I had some technical difficulties there. Sometimes that happens, but what are we talking about today? Do you remember what we're talking about today? How votes count, and how are we going to figure out how votes count? By making pizza. So first, before we can make our pizza, what we have to do, and this is actually the thing I am working on here. Hang on, let me switch my camera on my phone. We are going to make a pizza. And so before we can really even pick out our toppings and everything, we need to make our pizza dough. So let me solo that for right now. So for our pizza dough, the first thing that we need to do is start our yeast. Okay, so Olivia is going to be my special assistant today, and we're going to start letting our yeast proof. So I've got my phone camera set up here so that you can see inside my bowl. And I had posted the ingredients on our event page the other day, and hopefully you have them. If not, I will say out loud what we're adding. What's the first thing we're adding? What is it? It is 2 1/4 teaspoon of active yeast, and then 1 teaspoon of sugar. And I've actually mixed them together in here so I had less containers together. So can you go ahead and add that to the bowl? No, we've already done that. It's already measured. Just go ahead and add it to the bowl. Okay, so that's our yeast and our sugar. And then we have a cup and sometimes a extra tablespoon of warm water that we're going to add that in.
Whoa, it looks like wet sand.
It looks like wet sand. Now, when Efi bakes, Efi likes to bake where she adds the water first and then she adds the yeast and the sugar. I do it the other way. I add the yeast and sugar first and then I add my water. It doesn't make a difference.
It kind of smells like Cheerios.
It smells like Cheerios. Yeah, it does smell a little bit like Cheerios, but that's because Cheerios actually smell like yeast. So we have that going. So while that is proofing there, I'm going to talk a little bit about voting in the United States. So we need to let our yeast proof for about 5 to 10 minutes. So just a little overview. So today is Election Day, and Election Day is always in the United States. Oh, I'm skipping a thing. Before I talk about Election Day, I want to talk about baking history. So with baking history, we have a few rules. And the first rule is you bake it until you make it.
It rhymes, I know. I know it rhymes.
It rhymes, right? And so what that means is sometimes when we are baking things don't turn out right the first time. Sometimes they don't turn out right the second time or the third time. And so you just keep trying to bake it until you make it. And eventually one day you will have the type of product you exactly want. And even myself and even Efi, quite often when we are baking, things don't go right and we don't get exactly what we want. No, I don't want you to mix it just yet. The second rule we have, and this is more for if you're doing these classes with other people around you, or if you're able to talk to people in the comment section, is don't ever make assumptions. You don't know what's going on in other people's lives or what they're thinking or how they're handling something. And so if you want to know something about another person, just go ahead and ask them, but don't assume anything. Even if it's just something as simple as what you think someone's favorite color is, let's not assume anything. Our third rule is if it's not for you, then it's for someone else. And for example, today with pizzas, there are some toppings that people voted for that I don't particularly care for on my pizza. I don't often put pineapple on my pizza, but someone voted for pineapple today, so there's going to be some pineapple on my pizza. And if I really don't like that, if I'm not making it for me, then I'm going to make it for someone else and I'm going to gift it to them. And then our fourth rule of baking history is to always be kind. There's already so much going on in this world where people are not kind to each other, so we want to make sure that we're always adding kindness into the world. And if you see that somebody is struggling, ask them if they need help. They can say no, and that's okay. But try and be kind and ask them for help. Okay, so back to You can see in the picture there, my yeast is starting to proof. It's starting to make these little bubbles. And that's actually the yeast breathing and eating the sugar that we added in there, which is kind of fun. So today, as I said, is Election Day. Woohoo! It's the United States of America's Election Day. And today we are doing a presidential election. And this is a big deal. And you've probably been hearing about it for years now, because as the years have gone on, campaigning has started earlier and earlier and earlier. And it didn't always used to be that way. But now we seem to start campaigning like almost 2 years before an election even starts. But in the United States, the general election takes place on the first Tuesday of November, as long as it's not November 1st, but it takes place on the first Tuesday of November, which means it's either going to be any date between November 2nd and the very latest date it would be November 8th. Now, there are other elections that happen throughout the year. You might see primary elections or local elections or municipality elections, that those happen on days that are not necessarily the first Tuesday in November, but are still elections that happen throughout the year. And that's determined by your local government. So that's not something that's going to be set in our Constitution the way that this general election is. But we do sometimes have other elections on the ballot along with the presidential election or senatorial elections in November. So I'm just going to talk real fast. Well, I'm going to try not to talk that fast, actually. Is anybody watching? Can you tell me if when I switch back and forth, if you're getting a blank screen between me changing my slides, or is it staying that you can see the picture and it's just me on my computer that's getting a blank screen? But first, we're going to talk about who can vote. And while we do this, we're going to actually start adding our other ingredients into the pot here, because I don't know if you can see that in my bowl, my yeast has started proofing. There's lots of bubbles there, so I think it's ready for us to add the other ingredients to it.
It looks totally ready.
It looks totally ready. Okay, so the next ingredients that we're going to be adding.
What looks totally
Votally ready. Votally ready. So pizza dough and garlic knots, because it's the same recipe for me, are very simple. It's not a whole lot of ingredients. The next thing we're going to be adding is 3 cups of...
But it just looks like a lot of ingredients because all the toppings are the most food.
Yes. Olivia is saying that it looks like a lot of ingredients because on my counter here, I have a whole lot of pizza toppings and everything out there. So let me blow this up a little bit here while we are making our pizza. So there's 3 cups of flour, and I've actually already gone ahead and added my 1 tablespoon of salt into my flour and whisked it up a little bit. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to slowly add into the mixing bowl.
You can see it's starting to get a little white.
Okay, can you start mixing it a little bit now? Let's mix it in, and we'll add that more slowly. Remember, sometimes it's good to go slow. We don't want it flying everywhere. But we're adding in our flour and our salt now, and we're going to give it a good mix. And I'm going to slowly...
It looks like brown. It looks like chocolate milk.
It looks like... Really? I don't see it, but I'll take your word for it. But we're going to slowly add it in. Again, it's going to get really dry and lumpy, and that is completely normal. In a minute here.
That's what it's supposed to.
Okay, and so now I'm gonna take my adult strength here, my adult.
Because kid strength is not really strength.
I know some really strong kids. This is just experienced strength. So you see, it's still pretty dry here, but I'm just kind of getting it mostly incorporated.
It looks like fluffy clouds, but kind of brown.
Fluffy, slightly brown, fluffy clouds. Okay, but you see how it's still really dry. So now I'm going to show you one of my secrets here. I'm going to use my hand to mix it a little bit, but I don't like when my hand gets all sticky and coated in flour, which is pretty dry now, but it's going to warm up. So I'm actually going to do is I'm spraying my hand with some cooking spray. Because you can, you want to try? Over the bowl. You can spray anything with cooking spray. And then I'm just going to start mixing.
Your computer.
No, don't spray your computer with cooking spray. You could, and it would not stick to things, but you might ruin things. And so I'm just pressing down and flipping over. And I'm just going to keep doing that.
You can see both of our hands are in the bowl.
Yes, both of our hands.
Hands.
Oh, goodness. And when I have it, can I get into this side here? Thank you. When I have it mostly mixed together like this, what I'm going to do next is add a tablespoon of oil. It's so fluffy. Can you back your head up, please? I'm just going to kind of drizzle that in there. And I'm just going to keep mixing this with my hand, but while I do that, I'm going to switch back so that you can see my slides here. And we're going to talk about who can vote. So the U.S. Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, was in 1776. And it took a few more years before we were actually able to form a government and have a ratified constitution and start functioning as the United States of America. It took another 15 years or so. I don't remember the exact date, 1780 something.
I'm just watching it.
Yeah, and you see how the dough is starting to look more wet and round. It's like, but when we first started off in this country, only like Play-Doh, yeah, only white men who had property were allowed to vote. And even then, there were some conditions. You couldn't be Jewish or Catholic or Amish or Quaker or a whole bunch of other conditions that they had. Can you move your hand? All we can see in the picture is your hand. All other sorts of conditions. That went on for a while. In 1868, 1870, that's when the 14th and then later the 15th Amendments were signed and ratified. And that is when technically African Americans and then former slaves were granted citizen rights and should have been able to vote. And that worked for a little while, and then there were some riots. They actually did have black legislators and things like that, and then because certain people didn't like that, they actually made laws and put new barriers into place that kept people of color out of our government. 1887 is when states granted the Native Americans the right to vote. Think about that. In the United States, it took over 100 years of the country existing before we allowed the people who lived here first to vote. In 1919, that is 101 years ago, but it was effectively 1920 that women.
I don't know about all this stuff.
I do my research, but in 1920, women got the vote. But even then, there are buts and conditions. Different type of buts. There were conditions. Women had the right to vote, but you still had to be a white woman, and you had to pass literacy tests. So those seem to have been kind of subjectively implemented and things like that. But there were still lots of barriers for women of color to be able to vote. So even though we say 1920 women were on the right to vote, we mean some women, still not everybody. It was
like a little ball.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention 1887, if a Native American wanted to be a US citizen, they had to disavow their tribal rights. They had to no longer be part of a Native American tribe. You want to mix it. So Olivia's going to keep mixing that for a while. What she's doing is actually kneading it at this point. Because it was actually in 1924 or 1940, depending on the different bills that were signed before 1940, before Native Americans actually were completely U.S. citizens without any qualifications there. They still, to this day, actually have some voting issues, though, because of the way addresses work. And careful, you are hitting things because of how addresses work in terms of voter registration laws. 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, so people of Chinese ancestry were able to start becoming citizens of the United States and voting. 1964, 1965, this is when the 24th and 25th Amendments in the United States passed, and that is when African Americans and people of color finally won the right to vote here in the United States. That is a long time later. And what that actually does is not that it said that they were allowed to vote, it said it was now illegal to put up barriers that prevented them from being able to vote, because it used to be on a
kind of like what cats do.
Oh, okay. It used to be in kind of a county by county basis, like not even state by state, but county by county to decide, no one wants to see your hands, decide what qualifications were needed to be able to vote. And there were some counties that had laws like you had to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar to be allowed to vote. And of course, these were very subjectively implemented. If you were the right type of person, they didn't ask you these questions. So that removed all barriers towards voting, poll taxes and literacy tests, that sort of thing.
Pizza chef.
Yes, you like a pizza chef. And in 1971, the U.S. voting age was lowered to 18. It had been 21, and then it had also been lowered county by county, state by state, based on local elections and sort of things, so that people who were 18 could vote. There's actually some conversation now on the UK as to whether or not they should be allowing people who are 15 or 16 to vote in local elections, because, if you are paying income tax because you have a job, then you should have representations as a vote. Okay, so our pizza dough is pretty much set here. What you see is Olivia's kneading it. Can I show them something? I'm gonna go back to my double screen. When you knead, you kind of just flip it over and push it down and flip it and push it. And it should be kind of stretchy, still a little bit sticky. If it is too dry, you can add a little bit more oil. If it's too wet, add a little bit more flour.
And if it doesn't really get enough water, add more.
And if it doesn't have enough water, add more. You could add some water if it feels really oily. I'd probably suggest adding a little bit of oil, like just a teaspoon or so of oil if it's really dry. But you want to really be activating the gluten in it, because we want this to nicely rise up. So I'm going to kind of shape this into a little ball.
Can I shape it into a ball?
Okay, so it's already shaped into a ball. And then I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to actually take it back here, and I'm going to cover it on my stove here. I like to leave it on my stove with the stove on, because the extra heat from the stove, especially on cold days like we have here in Florida, really help to help the dough rise up. And then here, go back here, you can see I have a dough that I prepared this morning that is already risen and ready to be turned into some pizza doughs. So let me, okay, stop.
Really ready.
Does it?
Really like pizza.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is,
That's me voting.
that's you voting, is called the popular vote. And the popular vote is like when you just do something like a pizza thing. Hang on, I'm splitting my thing here. Here, hold this one. I'm actually going to split this one further. No, we're not splitting that one further.
So I'm gonna need this.
I'm going to get my pizza stone. This is my full size one. I have two smaller ones we're going to be using also.
So can one be big?
Yes. So we've got our dough, and I'm just going to start making into a disc, and then I'm going to be stretching it. So a few days ago, okay. Can I talk? Okay, so a few days ago when I posted that I was going to teach this class, I also posted a poll up onto Facebook. And I asked for people to vote for their favorite pizza toppings. And I suggested 3 toppings. I said vegetables, please don't touch. Vegetable, pepperoni, and cheese. And you see I'm just kind of moving my fingers around as I stretch it. And then I flip it over and I keep going. I suggested pepperoni, cheese, and vegetables. And I left an open option that people could add an option if they wanted to do a write-in option. But I did say that people could only vote one time. And we had 28 people vote. And this is how they voted. Oh, I have to move my mouse back onto a surface. Oh, I'll actually go back to that one. So this is how people voted. We had 28 votes, and most people voted for vegetables. We had 8 people out of 28 who voted for vegetables. 7 people voted for all of the toppings. 6 people voted for pepperoni. 4 people voted for cheese. I'm getting a hole in the middle. I know I don't want that. Okay. 1 person voted for sausage. 1 person voted for pineapple. And 1 person voted for sausage and mushrooms. So right now I'm stretching my dough here, and yeah, I've got a hole in it, and that's okay. But I'm just going to keep stretching it. But we ended up with 28 votes, and so clearly most people picked vegetables. So the bigger section of our pizza pie is going to be vegetables. I keep forgetting this is half a dough, so I'm not going to get the full pizza out of this. And I probably should have let it risen longer, but sometimes you don't have time for that. So I'm just doing my best, and I'm pressing it out. And I'm going to put a little bit of tomato sauce on it, because what's pizza without tomato sauce? Did you wash your hands? Go wash your hands.
Always wash your hands after the bathroom break.
Yes, and you can see I am not making a particularly large amount of sauce. I'm just spreading it kind of lightly, but I am going close to the edges. And now normally I would put cheese all over this entire pizza, but I'm not going to, because cheese was one of our voting options. So it's not going there. Okay, so I'm going to start putting the toppings on here based on how people voted, but I'm going to talk about the United States election. And I'm going to switch back so that you can see. Slide. So in the United States of election, for the presidential election, we don't use a popular vote. We have the popular vote that we use to determine who our electoral college votes for. And it's different in different places. I'm sorry, I'm doing the vegetables ones first. There's vegetables and there was all toppings, that one. I'll do it at the same time.
Mom, can I do the other?
Yes. I'm just trying to put a little bit of all the vegetables,
Pretty much on it.
all of the toppings.
Pretty much on it.
And vegetables was about 27%, and all toppings was about another 20%. So I'm going to actually be trying to make that be roughly half of my pizza in a minute. Yes, you're going to only be putting cheese on part of it. Onion, shallot, mushrooms. Okay, that's all of my vegetables there. I'm going to put on all my sausage. But in the United States, in the Electoral College, what you do in most states is that you vote for, you put some cheese on this much. Nope, you just had your hand in your mouth, so no. You're going to put cheese on this much. So you have to go wash your hands again if you want to help. In the Electoral College, what happens is your state will vote, and depending on the state, because there's actually a couple of states, I think maybe 3, who actually split it based on the way the popular vote falls. But in most states, it's winner take all. Florida, for example, is a winner take all state. And in that state, what happens is all of our votes, no matter what it looks like here, we have our Electoral College. This is how the votes are distributed. You can see on this first slide here that Florida has 29 electoral votes, and California has 55, and Maine has 4, and Washington has 7 or 12, and Oregon has 7. But then you look over at the population density, and you will see that where those states that have the bigger number of electoral votes also have the darker colors of the population density. So electoral college votes are mostly distributed based on how many people are living in those states, but it varies district by district. So like you can see here, this is the 2016 election. Good job. This is the 2016 election. And what happened in 2016 is you can see that there's some states that are very solidly blue or very solidly red in the top map that shows the way the Electoral College voted. Because as I mentioned, in some places, okay, that's good. The votes are winner take all. And so even though in Florida, you can see that there's the very southern tip of Florida is very blue, or in Texas where you can see that the west coast is blue, or there's that blue swatch that goes through parts of of the southeast United States in the bottom map, the one that's going by election precinct. When you look at the top map, which shows the electoral votes, they're solid colors, because even though a certain percentage of people in that country voted for the blue candidate or the red candidate, because you can also see in other places where there's dark blue spots, there's little patches of red, but on the upper map, they're solidly blue. Their votes were not represented by the Electoral College because it's winner take all. So the popular vote in Florida might have been very evenly split, or actually split slightly more, but then the Electoral College vote gives 100% of those votes to the person who won the popular vote. And so if you look at the graphic on your right here, it's on my right at least, you will see that Donald Trump had 304 electoral votes, which means he won the electoral votes. You need 270 electoral votes to win the US presidency. They actually lost the popular vote, because the way that the states with people who made the popular vote and versus electoral college vote worked out, it wasn't evenly balanced. And so actually the popular vote said that Hillary Clinton had won, but the electoral votes, which is what the US presidency depends on, showed that Donald Trump had won. And so he became our 45th president. And so as I said, here's our results. And I'm still working on my pizza here. And I don't know if you can really see it. Let me switch back here. I'm hoping you can see all of this. Every time I flip back, I see just a solid blue screen. But I'm working on our pizza here. And so I've got some vegetables on it. And there's one section where it was just a pepperoni, and another section where it was a sausage and mushrooms, but they didn't win they only had like one vote each. Another section where it's just cheese. I'm going to put just cheese right there, nothing else. So you can see that my pizza pie ends up being really different throughout it. It's not evenly split up in any way. It's very different. I've got all my toppings here. Oh, I forgot to put just one piece of pepperoni. Just pepperoni here, just pineapple here, just sausage and mushroom here, just cheese, just vegetables. And it ends up being split up a lot. And so I'm going to set that there, and I'm going to show you what happens with the Electoral College. I'm going to move this out of the way. And I'm going to grab one of my little pizzas. I'm going to roll out that dough because in the Electoral College, what happens? Yes. In the Electoral College, what happened is that the entire pizza, we stretch it. In the Electoral College, it's winner take all. So our entire pizza is going to be vegetables. And I need to do this quickly. I will let you do. Yeah, so, and you might notice there's some granules down there. I've got cornmeal on my baking stone so that the dough does not stick when I bake it, and it comes off a little better. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to put a little bit of tomato sauce on there.
It's a mini pizza.
And it's a mini pizza. And then since vegetables is what won, the entire pizza is getting covered in vegetables.
That's a vegetable.
And so even though 6 people voted for pepperoni is not going on my pizza because this is the Electoral College, and all votes go. So all 100% of the votes will go to the person who won the popular vote. And for our pizza topping, I got olives. For our pizza vote topping, that means that all of the votes go to vegetable. Now, next slide. There are several other types of elections that happen. Here in Florida, Gesundheit, we what? No, we didn't have any pizza there.
Can I do that?
Yes. So in Florida, we have closed primaries, and those happen usually in the spring. No, do not throw it. Usually about every other year. There's also a thing called open, and what happens in closed primaries is you are only able to vote for the party that you are registered to. So whether it's a Democrat, Republican, Independent, Independent doesn't have any, but if Libertarian, Green Party, any other numbers of parties, that you are voted for, can you press it out? It's going to, you're only able to vote for the candidate of your party. What we also have is called closed primaries. And in a closed primary, or open primary rather, you can pick which party you want to vote for. You can vote for either parties, but you pick one. You go in and you say, I'm registered as a Republican, but I want to vote in the Democratic primary, or I'm registered as a Democrat, but I want to vote in the Republican primary. And so you pick which party you want to vote for. There's another type, and this one was actually on the Florida ballot this time, is to see if we wanted to switch to this type of thing. And it's worded differently, but my in-house historian told me what it actually is called. It's kind of what's called a jungle primary. What happens there is that you can go in and you can vote for any candidate that you want to. So whether it's Republican, Democrat, if you've got 6 Democrats on there, you can vote for any one of the Democrats that you want to. If you've got 12 Republicans on there, you can vote for one of the Republicans. And it sounds like it gives you a lot of choices. You can vote for whoever you want to, and whichever 2 candidates win the most votes go into the general election. We got to bake them first, and then we'll talk about that. And so what happens there that I didn't realize, but my resident historian told me about, is that it can often split the vote. So in our election before, we saw that vegetables won the vote. Well, in this jungle primary example, and I'm going to remove my brand banner there so that you can see it better. In our jungle primary election, you can see that I split up our vegetables. I made it so that there was a different vote for mushrooms, onions, peppers, or olives. And we had 8 people who voted for that who voted for vegetables. So I went ahead and just split them into 2 for each in our jungle primary, because I want to show you this example. So you see what happens here in this example is that we have 2 people who voted for olives. So I'm going to put 2 olives on there. And 2 people who voted for mushroom. So 2 mushrooms. 2 people for pepper, but there's a big pepper, so I'm going to put 1 pepper on. And 2 people who voted for onions, so it's very small sliver of onions. And so whereas before the entire pizza seemed like it was filled up with vegetables, now only a very small section is. So I'm going to do still my pineapple, still my sausage and mushroom. Really, my sausage and mushroom. And then the rest of the votes, the other 6 votes, were pepperoni. And so whereas before it seemed like our vegetables had a huge section of the pie and were definitely going to win, now the largest section is pepperoni. We still got some cheese there. And so what would happen now is, before, you see we did this pizza to the Electoral College that was entirely vegetables. Let me make these bigger. Our pizza before was entirely vegetables, because vegetables won our popular vote based on our Electoral College. Now we have this pizza where the big winner is pepperoni. And so you can see how sometimes when you split your options, so instead of being able to vote for any vegetables, I'm now voting for specifically onion, or specifically mushrooms, or specifically peppers, they lost. And the winner was pepperoni, because if I were to make this pizza based on my election from my jungle primary vote, my actual entire pizza would be pepperoni. So we can see how the different ways you vote can change the outcome of the election. So let me go back to my slides here and see if I've got anything else I wanted to talk about. Nope, I think that was the end of it. So, in a moment. So you're probably just as anxious as she is to make your own pizza. I'm going to doctor these a little bit, because I do plan to eat them today so that there's more cheese on all of them. And we're going to make our pizzas. With your pizza dough, what you're going to do after it's risen up, you're going to punch it down again, and then you're going to knead it one more time, let it rise up again. When it rises up, you want it to be about twice the size that it was with your original ball when it started. And then you're going to stretch them out. And you're going to put on whatever toppings you want. Olivia later today actually wants to make a chocolate pizza. So we're going to experiment with that and figure out how to make chocolate pizza. And if you have any other questions, please let me know. When your pizza is ready to go into the oven, you're going to put it in the oven at 350 degrees for anywhere between 10 and 18 minutes, depending on how large your pizza is. But you're really looking for that crust to be kind of risen and golden. You might want to make sure it's not on the highest rack in your oven. That way your top doesn't burn while your crust has not burned. You can do it on a stone pizza pan. You can do it on a metal pizza pan. You can do it on whatever baking sheet that you have. It does not really matter. Just make sure you watch it and let it cook until you like it. It's all about baking it till you make it and the way that you want things to be. So if you have questions about this election, please let us know. Myself and my in-house historian are very happy to answer some questions about this. If you are an adult, feel free to jump over to my partner page, Professor Matt is Drunk, where my husband, who is the history professor, will answer some more questions about how elections have happened throughout history. But we know that this election is being very widely covered. And because of the way that votes are being counted, because of vote by mail and day of election and certain state rules, there's probably not going to be a decision made tonight. So we wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about why it matters that we count every vote. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you later. Happy baking. Let me end this.
Okay.